the week before, I guess. We're gonna just solely work in this tonight, and hopefully that will help. So we are ready to go. Hopefully you guys found the reading just thrilling and exciting. Listen, we have to tell you that Mr. Hurley and I have to tell you, we looked at all of your why statements from the last session. Y'all are awesome. That's all I have to say. Like, you guys really have some great reasons for wanting to do this and changing things and being different than what you had in school. So bravo to you. And we really appreciate how much the thought you put into that, just for that little activity. So as we go through all this stuff, it'll start to get a little overwhelming, but just remember your why. Right, Mr. Hurley?
That's right. And your responses were like Dr. Simmons and I were talking, and we were just all both blown away on on all of them, actually. Just it made me kind of branch out and think differently as well. So I appreciate all of y'all's input and the effort y'all put into that for sure.
Yeah, it's something little, but I think it's really worthwhile. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about perceptions of individuals with disabilities. We're going to get into the laws and regulations surrounding students with disabilities. We'll talk about some parents and families. We'll have some breakout rooms. We'll watch some videos. So hopefully it'll be fun and exciting. Like I said, we're going to solely use Zoom. So your participation will be, just commenting things in the Zoom chat. And then when we come back into the big session. So the first thing, let's start off. So in the Zoom chat, tell us one positive thing from this week, or you don't have to do both, one or the other. Some comment about the reading, something you found really interesting. There's a lot in that little chapter about the reading. What's something you found interesting, or one positive about this week? I'm just going to pull up my chat here so I can see as you guys type in there. And make sure when you do the chat, you do it to everyone. Let's see, what is it? Oh, somebody got to go to the game. Oh, Karma learned a new trick. I love it. Yes, Clemson won, and so did the Gamecocks, y'all. So it was a good weekend for both my teams this weekend. I was pretty happy camper. No classes on Friday. That's a huge thing. Let's see what else we got. I think a lot of people, Mr. Hurley, went to the football game.
Yes, that and family. That's a good thing.
But I like this one. So let's see. Faith thought that there are a lot of different disabilities. There are a lot of disabilities in South Carolina. That is for sure. We'll learn about all of them. Clemson won. Seeing my family. Yeah, Emily, that's true. Especially I didn't fully get rights or even implemented until the 60s. It really didn't become law until 75. So it's kind of crazy. I like the chat in the Zoom classmates. Good. Yeah, if you guys like this better than Pear Deck, we'll just stick with Zoom. I think it'll be better. That way we can kind of see each other and stuff like that. Kyle made a lot of money dog sit. We need to find out who he dog sits, Mr. Hurley. Well, awesome. It looks like most people really were excited that Clemson won the game. That's good. All right, so we are going to get started right away. So the first thing we're going to talk about is perceptions of individuals with disabilities. So in the Zoom chat again, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that too. Why do we focus on ability? You can do either, put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that and tell us what you think.
I think it's important to focus on ability opposed to like disability, because going back to like the reading, you put the people before anything else that they have. So if you're constantly, you don't want to constantly be a pessimist. So if you're focusing on the ability, you're able to open up a lot more horizons than just one definition.
Absolutely. It's like we talked about that first person, right? Looking at that individual first, not the disability. Anybody have anything different or think something different? Mr. Hurley, anything in the chat? Oh,
Reading through and everything is a positives and strengths. Ty, I see you have a question.
go ahead, Ty.
Hand raised, go for it.
My sound already on. But I just wanted to say we focus on the ability, because if we don't, we put limitations on the student and not have them live up to their full potential.
Absolutely. Good answer. So then give us an example of using that first person language. Oh. Somebody's got some background now. Child with autism. Yep. Oh, there we go. A student with Down syndrome, exceptional child, a child with Down syndrome, right? Just like we talked about, the individual comes first, and then comes the disability, person with autism. Good job. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to watch this. So this is about perception. So we're going to watch this short little video together, and then you're going to go into breakout rooms for 5 or 6 minutes and really think about this question. And then we'll come back and talk about it for a few minutes. But considering the video, do you feel people's perceptions of others play a role in the success of individuals with disabilities? Why or why not? So you'll kind of talk about that in your breakout rooms. But first we'll watch the video. Let's hope this works. Let me escape this.
I feel so blessed to be able to just live my life and have people be motivated by it.
Can you guys see that?
No.
Okay,
I have a spot.
I'll start it again. Can you see it now? All right.
I feel so blessed to be able to just live my life and have people be motivated by it.
I have a spinal cord injury. And so when I was seeing people roll by, I was like, wow, so that's what I'm going to look like. I think I knew I was different. I knew I think it's cancer and kids.
I was born paralyzed. I was born with spina bifida. So I've been paralyzed my whole life, and it's the only life I know. So I had to kind of grow into learning I was different.
My biggest insecurity is my legs. So I decided, hey, if that's my biggest insecurity, then I'm gonna start a gene line. And all of the pictures are based around my genes and my legs and other people's legs. And that's where I realized that it's okay to be different, because once you embrace it, your entire world changes.
People need to like, they don't have to react to me a lot of times. So like I make little jokes like, hey, calm down, it's okay. I'll be okay.
I would have people treat me as if I wasn't really there, and I would have people treat me like they didn't want anything to do with me. And perhaps it's because they were scared and they didn't know any other response.
One of my favorite things is when I'm out in public and I have all my girls with me who are all in chairs, who are all gorgeous. And we literally love when we see heads just turn.
Society doesn't correlate disability and being attractive. We are beautiful people. Everyone's beautiful in their own way, but we can be stylish. We can be gorgeous and stunning and fabulous, as I like to say, because yes, I see myself as being fabulous.
Being a dancer, once a dancer, always a dancer. I didn't stop. So I would go out to the clubs and I would get my boogie on. And I was surprised by how guys would approach me and be like, hey, you're hot. And they wouldn't say you're still hot. They would say you're hot.
There is the black and white, there's the bad and there's the good. So as long as you're focusing on the good, then the bad just seems to melt away.
We're only given one life, and you got to be proud of it.
You want to bust a couple of moves? Oh.
Perfect. Let's get it done.
So you can see, people's perception. So let's talk about in your breakout rooms, Mr. Hurley. I think you can do the breakout rooms.
Yes.
So you'll be assigned a breakout room. You'll come back in 5 to 6 minutes and just talk about that. And how do you think people's roles or people's perceptions might have changed the outcome for those folks? Nice. Looks like breakout rooms worked. Very cool. Would you give them like 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we can jump in them if you want. I'm gonna jump in room 1 if you want to jump in room 2 here.
Okay. So you just go click on the join.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
Yeah.
The that specific question, I would say yeah, because like people,
Say yes.
despite what people say and stuff, like they are affected by what other people say, and they do always constantly think about like what other people think of them. So I think a good perception leads to like a better relationship and like a better type of thought moving forward, and like vice versa for negative.
For sure. I also feel like tagging on from there, it's also, it's no different than like anybody else. If somebody is truly affected by like something somebody says about them or like through social media, stuff like that, those are all things that really just like change how we view ourselves, regardless of whatever disability it is or not. But the only like difference between the two is like the representation. So like the video we just watched, is it's like it's hard finding that community that is like truly represented, so it's easier to feel more comfortable with yourself and to be perceived not as your disability, I suppose.
I also feel like the way people look at you, depending on who you are, it could be discouraging or it could be uplifting, and depending on what they're saying as well. Like from my perception, that video was very positive, but it is people out here who don't view it as the same way. It is, like they said, it's a good and it's a bad side of everything. And that, especially social media, it can be very damaging, or you can use that as motivation to uplift and beat the odds. But it depends on the person and the situation.
I agree. I feel like it's hard to like overcome what other people are saying about you. I think it depends on the person, honestly. I think it's especially hard if you do have a disability.
Hey, they were having a great conversation.
Oh yeah. There we go. All right. Well, I'm going to, because I went to 3 different rooms and they were all pretty much done with the discussion. They were all muted. So I asked them if they had any questions or anything of that nature, and they were all good to go. So
If you
I
want
said
to,
I'd give them.
yeah,
You what?
if you want to bring them back, that's fine.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
All right, so I think we're just about back. So anybody, I mean, I know I jumped in a room and Mr. Hurley jumped in a couple just to listen to a little bit about what you guys were talking about. Anybody want to share anything that their group talked about, or what do you think about perceptions? Does it play a role in the success of somebody?
We said that like in a way it depends on the person, because like it really, part of it's like how much you let other people's like opinions of you affect you, and that kind of goes for anyone. But then more specifically, we were saying for like people with disabilities, you need someone who believes in you and like thinks you're capable, so they can like give you the opportunity to like get a job or give you the opportunity to be independent. So it's like different for them. Like they need someone who has a good perception of them, otherwise they won't be given opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else want to share one? And then I have a story I can tell you for something I'm facing right now with a parent, actually.
We had kind of said like it's unfortunate, but it's not, most disabilities, it's not normalized, and a lot of people stare and look uncomfortable, and it shouldn't be like that. It should just, it should just be accepted. And a lot of people have a hard time accepting different disabilities, and they make faces and stare. And we had just said that like as humans, we need to do better about accepting everybody, and everybody's like beautiful the way that they are.
Yep, especially if they look different, if they're in a wheelchair, if let's say if they have Tourette's, they start making noise, or it's a student with autism and they, yell and scream, that type of thing. But yeah, that perception, it can definitely play a huge role. And that's why we focus on the students' abilities and not their disabilities. So I'll give you an example of something I'm dealing with right now with a parent. So I have a student who's in one of my self-contained classrooms, and 3 years ago, I came to Anderson 4 and kind of mixed my classes. So I have verbal children and nonverbal children in the same room, because we've got to have a mix, right? If you're nonverbal, you have to have some verbal children in your room so you can have models. Well, the parents are adamant. They are so upset with me because their daughter doesn't belong in the room, and I quote, with those children. So yeah, dealing with this in today's day and age, and I had to actually tell her that some of those children, don't discount them because they're nonverbal, actually have higher scores and can do more than your daughter can. So it is that perception. And it really upsets me when we see parents nowadays and adults having that perception as well, assuming that the children can't do. And if there's anything, Mr. Hurley, I don't know about you, especially since you teach the low incidence, I'm a huge advocate for that, because those children have many, many abilities and not just disabilities. So hopefully you guys will, if you see students like that or see something happening, you'll be ones to say, hey, wait a minute, don't discount them just because they look different or they act different. So yeah, it's pretty uplifting to deal with it right now. So here's just a little fun one we're going to watch. So I don't know if you guys know this, but there are a lot of people who are famous who actually have disabilities, who have had great success. So I'm again going to see if I can do this. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Hold on. Share, share. I'm trying to do this on one small screen. I really got to get a bigger screen for this. This. Oh, sorry, guys. Can you see this? Okay, good. I don't know why it's not big. Sorry, I'm trying to make this bigger. Can you see the whole screen or just part of it? Mr. Hurley, can you see all of it?
Just
I
part
just
of
see
it.
part of it.
Hold on, we'll get it right. We'll get it right. Why it's not letting me go to the big screen. There we go. Can you see it now? The whole screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you guys know that all of those folks had disabilities? Pretty amazing. I think it was not Tom Hanks. I can't think of him right now. Who played in Top Gun? Tom Cruise. He has dyslexia. Did y'all know that? Pretty cool though. But you think about if they let the perceptions that other people may have had, and you would never have known. Like I didn't know Julia Roberts had a speech impairment. So I mean, it just goes to show again that we focus on the abilities because there's a lot of things they can do. Individual disabilities can do. Okay, so let's talk about IDEA. This is the Individuals with Disabilities Act. So this is our big law, right? So we're gonna go a little bit through this. I'm gonna briefly glance through the history. Mr. Hurley, if you want to jump in at any point, please feel free. But you know, as we kind of talked about, someone had said that it in their chat they were surprised it didn't really become until the the 60s. It was 75 that we had our first free and appropriate public education to students from the ages of 3 to 21. So as school districts now, we are required to serve even children who are 3 years old. We start serving them and start that process before they turn 3. So we start that process when they're about 2.5. And we do have to serve our children. And you know, the law is called PL 94-142. That's, I don't know about Mr. Hurley, I'm probably a little bit older, but that's how I learned about it. But now it's called IDEA or IDEIA. And you know,
it was
go ahead.
public law. It was public law when I was in college. It was known as 94-142.
Yep.
Was the big thing that was discussed for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you remember in the reading, it talked a lot about even like in the 1800s, how they were dealing with individuals like this and all of that. So special education has been around for a long time. It just didn't become put into law until 75. So we talk about least restrictive environment. They talk about the evaluation of a student. They talk about the IEP and then due process and procedural rights. Because as you know, they are all protected under this federal law. So some of the elements are what we call FAPE. So that's that free, appropriate public education to students from 3 to 21. Zero rejects. So really what that means is that we as a school district can't say, we don't serve you, or we can't serve your child, or we can't help this child. We have to provide a program and education for those children. So that least restrictive environment, otherwise known as LRE, really is that education. Obviously, the most least restrictive is education of students in a general education setting, right, without disabilities. Then you'll hear terms called mainstreaming, which is really when you see students like in recess or PE, or they're kind of dipped into those classes. And then you have inclusion, which could be a whole nother class, I feel like, on teaching inclusion and co-teaching and all of those good things. Another element is about that evaluation. So we have to have parental consent. We use non-discriminatory assessments. Once the evaluation is completed, then we come back and we talk about if the child is eligible. And then we look at the IEP, or the individualized education plan. We look at long-term goals. We look at short-term objectives. And then we also look at due process. So again, like we said, they are protected by federal law, and there have been lawsuits. So really, this is just kind of a little timeline of the reauthorization. So in 1983, we recommend parent information centers. We started talking about children from birth to 3, and then transition services. We have Child Find for infants and toddlers. Again, those little 2-year-olds. In 1990, it was renamed IDEA. In 92, it really talked about that first person language. And then in 97, it mandated that all of our students, even with disabilities, will participate in all state and district assessments. There is an alternative assessment, but it's for a limited group of students. But everybody, all of our students with disabilities, participate in the general assessments with accommodations, just like our general ed peers. So again, this just kind of goes over a little bit. So Child Find, if you look in 86, so Child Find is literally districts and folks finding children. So it could be children in your classrooms that you suspect may have a disability, and what's that process. And as the course goes on, we'll talk about MTSS and all of that good stuff. but it's all about that process. So we have an obligation as well to find children in classrooms, in schools, out in the communities, all sorts of ways to offer and provide services and supports. What does IDA stand for? Quick check. Somebody tell it out too, as you're all chatting.
Individuals with Disability Act.
Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Perfect.
Sorry, Education
Yep.
Act.
Don't forget the E. Some people, listen, y'all do me a favor. Promise me one thing, you will leave this class at least doing two things. One, always talking first person and never calling it IDEA. Hey, let's go talk about IDEA. It's an acronym for a reason. Don't call it IDEA. You want me to do this, Mr. Hull? You want to take this over?
Sure. So law, they changed it in 2004. So sometimes you'll hear it as IDEA. Sometimes you'll hear it as IDEIA, which is the Improvement Act from when they reauthorized the law back in 2004. And what they really wanted to focus on were they changed the identification for individuals with SLD, which is specific learning disabilities. They also look for highly qualified special education teachers. So when I started teaching, my first year teaching was 2005. And so when I was going through the whole interview process, they had to make sure that I was highly qualified in special education in certain areas. So that was something they pushed and reauthorized in 2004. Another was using these peer-reviewed services. And as you go through the program, you'll hear more about peer-reviewed research and these evidence-based practices, making sure that, hey, what we're doing has research to back it up. And also a summary of performance. And that goes along with the teachers and the students as well as going through the school year, making sure that we're meeting certain expectations in this 2004. Now, it hasn't really been reauthorized. There hasn't been any changes since 2004. Most around, usually it's about every 5 to 7 years they look at wanting to add things to it. So it's coming around. So, but the last one was in 2004. So yeah, I still use IDEA. So when you're looking at IDEA, so it classifies in 13 different disability categories. And some of these you have heard of, some of these you may not have heard of, but that's the whole point of this course, is to get into the nitty-gritty of these categories and, characteristics and what to look for. So here are the disability categories. You have autism, deaf blindness and deafness, ED or emotional disturbance. I've also heard it as EBD, emotional behavior disturbance, or emotional behavior disorder. Hearing impairments, intellectual disability or ID, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, which is OHI, SLD, like we mentioned earlier, the specific learning disabilities, speech language impairment, with the class, I hear a lot of SLI, TBI or traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. So as we go through the rest of this semester, we're going to be getting into each one of these categories. So we're going to learn the ins and outs and what it looks like and how to, if you have a student with, a hearing impairment in your classroom, what are some things that we can do in the classroom to assist that? What does that look like? So, all right. So in the Zoom chat, real quick, of the 13 categories, name 2 of them. And it's okay if you want to throw out some acronyms as well. That'll work too. In the world of special education, you'll use a lot of acronyms. Autism, SLD, autism, autism, OHI, TBI. Awesome. Wonderful. Excellent. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. autism, deaf, blind, blindness, TBI, motion, speech,
Awesome,
language
guys.
impairment. Those are great. Excellent job. Fantastic.
So you'll hear too, if you haven't like ID, as we get into that, there's like 3 different levels of students with intellectual disability. So there's a mild, a moderate, and a profound or severe. We'll also talk about things like high incidence, low incidence. Mr. Hurley teaches a low incidence class, whereas like a high incidence would be like speech or SLD.
SLD, right. And where you have like the low incidence, which is like the severe and profound intellectual disabilities and stuff like that would fall in the low. So excellent. Good responses.
Awesome, guys. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the major provisions. So if you have your textbook, if you want to look at it, there's that pretty little table. I really think they laid it out really nicely. But obviously the first thing in a provision is that identification, right? So we're going to identify our students, we're going to evaluate them, we're going to go through that process and determine if they meet one of those 13 disabilities. So what's interesting about special ed is even though this is a federal law, every state has their own criteria for eligibility based on the disability. So if we have a student that moves, let's say from Georgia to South Carolina, we have to reevaluate the child and make sure they meet eligibility in South Carolina. So again, it is kind of crazy because even though it's a federal law, it is still state by state in terms of the eligibility. And each state in some ways calls it something a little bit different. I've seen it, some of the disabilities called something different. And here's the thing. Oh, yes, it's free. It is free, right? We are obligated to offer a free and appropriate public education. So like we said, we cannot turn anybody down. We can't say we don't have a program for you or we can't serve your child. So if you're ever in meetings or hear people say, hey, we can't serve that child here, that's a no-no. We have to create programs and serve them, right? Ideally, you create programs for children as opposed to fitting the children into already created programs. But also in the real world, sometimes that's not realistic, right? Sometimes you have to create or fit them into your program that's there. Another thing IDEA calls for is due process. Again, like we talked about, these are federal laws. These children are protected by federal laws. So there are certain things we can and we can't do. And parents have the right and they can sue school districts and they can file complaints with the state. And I promise you they do. Because of something they feel like their child's not being served appropriately or their child is being discriminated against. They can also file suits with the Office of Civil Rights in terms of like a discrimination, things like that. So the parents, until the children turn age of majority, which is 18, have the right to do that. And what's interesting is they can actually go back 3 years. So even if a child, let's say, graduated, they can go back 3 years and still sue a school district. And things I've seen that they go after are often monetary components, or they've had to place their child in a private school because the school couldn't provide. So then they've asked for reimbursement or asked for school districts to pay for those private schools, things like that. And there are lots of times that the school districts don't prevail, that the parents do prevail. It just all depends on what's happening. Parent consultation. So parent input, parent support is huge in this process. You cannot do this without parent support. We can't even evaluate a student without parent permission. So if a parent says no, even though, let's say, a team recommends a child be evaluated, if the parent says no, we can't evaluate. There's nothing we can do about that. We can continue to offer interventions and things like that, but parents have a huge say in this, and they should. They absolutely should. The other thing it talks about is that least restrictive environment. So you guys may have seen this, you may not have, you may have heard it if you're out in schools, but there has to be a continuum of services in every school district. Now, it doesn't have to be in every school, but it has to be offered in every school district. So we have to go from less restrictive to more restrictive. So the least, obviously, you can see here is that full-time regular ed class, right? So that's that least restrictive. And then we move into that regular class and we may have a special ed teacher and we have some pull-out sessions going on. Like they pull them out for a little reading or a little math or a little writing or something like that. And then we might have some more time where they actually spend some time in a resource room. So there's a little more direct instruction going on. And then it goes to a separate class, regular activities, but now we're in a separate class. So you're in maybe a self-contained room for part of the time, and then you go back out with your general ed peers all the way to that full-time self-contained classroom, which I think is, Mr. Hurley, what you teach, where they're not really going out into the general ed classroom except for maybe some mainstreaming a little bit here and there to have that social peer interaction. So it goes from that least to more restrictive environment.
Right, yeah. And you can have a more restrictive environment than a full time in a separate class. It's very rare. You might hear of students having to receive hospital homebound services. And that it's a process. For example, I do in my classroom, I do have 3 students that receive hospital homebound services. But yeah, I'm kind of like a hybrid between a self-contained classroom where my students are with me pretty much all day. But then there are some activities where my students go out into the general ed population, and it's more for social interaction, more social skills, to be with their peers. But it's not every day. It's maybe a couple of times a week for like art class or chorus or band. Weightlifting is a big one where I'm at. My smart classes really enjoy going out and being part of that. So at least you'll hear a lot being the LRE, in the classroom. Oh, what's, the LRE? So
goes back to that vocabulary. So let me ask you guys this, since you all are clearly much younger than this old lady here. Do you remember in your high school seeing like self-contained classrooms, or seeing some of these classrooms in your high school?
Yes.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, I'm gonna age myself. So, I graduated high school in 1992. I feel like that's like really old now, but I don't remember seeing self-contained classrooms or really anything back in the early 90s. You just didn't see it. Now, obviously they're, we're everywhere and we are in schools and people see it. So I think it's really interesting how it shifted over the years and totally changed. But as we go into the individual education plan, right? That IEP. So you can see that IEP is all about understanding, communication, and cooperation. And it really is a team effort between the child, the parent, the teacher, and anybody else that works with the kids. So we'll talk about a little bit more about IEPs as the semester goes on, but that is the document in which we utilize. So non-discriminatory evaluation. So we have to make sure that we're using evaluations that don't discriminate against the child. For example, if a child is native or comes from a home where they only speak Spanish, we are required to provide an interpreter or an individual who can speak Spanish and administer the testing. So we always have to go by an individual's home language. If we have a child who is, deaf, we have to provide an evaluation accommodations to accommodate that. So they have to be non-discriminatory, and we have to meet the needs and make sure we're evaluating correctly. One of the other important things that IDA leads for is confidentiality. So this is huge, y'all. This is big. So, you can't ever, when you're a teacher, well, I must say can't ever, but I highly don't recommend, if you're in a grocery store and you're with colleagues talking about specific children in your classroom. All of these children, like we talked about, are protected by federal law, and you cannot talk about them, about these children with individuals who don't have any knowledge of the children, don't really have any knowledge. They just don't have it happen. You can talk with your colleagues and stuff in confidentiality, but you don't want to put things in emails, and you don't want to say things about students like that, because it can get you in trouble. So be careful with that.
Yeah. Also, the like evaluation results or any kind of placements are kept confidential. Now, the parents do have the right to see those and have access, but those are also biggies that kept confidential.
Yep. It also talks about personnel development in services. So we have to make sure our teachers are getting in services and professional development and stuff as well, to learn more about disabilities and how to accommodate them and strategies in the classroom. So it is a mandate. So thus the goals reflect the desires of conduct. IDA is not an option. A teacher can't say, I don't want to give that accommodation, or I don't want to follow that IEP. When you are signing a legal document saying, yep, okay, I'm going to do this. I know I have to do this type thing. So let's talk a little bit about, and again, we can do it, but how do you think COVID-19, right? That was huge. So how do you think that impacted in the reading? There was a whole, there's a little bit of a section, a page on that. So how did that impact students with disabilities? And, give us an example in the chat or talk about it, because it really did change things. I mean, look at us teaching this class online.
Focus on Zoom.
Yeah, on Zoom. We've learned we can do so many things. Once your old professor learns how to use the technology correctly, we'll be good to go, y'all.
So I remember looking at the statistic where it was showing that a lot of students with disabilities also come from low-income families. So a lot of the times it was hard for them to get those like additional resources for students with disabilities, whether it be like speech therapy that they deserved or like seeing their audiologist and stuff like that. So I know that was a huge thing.
Think of those families that didn't have access to, like you said, the technology. So schools had to provide hotspots and things like that for students so they could get to it. And then where do you go? I don't know if you know Anderson Ford, but Townville is one of our schools, and there's nothing out in Townville. Like they had to go to like local libraries and parking lots just to get service. What are some of the other things folks are saying?
See a lot about socialization. I can speak from experience on that with my class during COVID. Socialization was huge. Like my parents would call me trying to see if we could meet somewhere, even if it was in a parking lot in our cars, just so they could have that interaction. And I think that for me, that was the most difficult transition for my students, just personally, was the socialization. I see a lot with that. That's some great answers.
It's huge. I know in Anderson 4, I wasn't a part of the district then, but they actually, our self-contained students actually continued to come to school during COVID. So they did have classes. Awesome. They did hold them. So for our, most of your population, they did continue to come to school if the parents opted to send them, because it's really hard to do that on Zoom. So you'll see a little screenshot. So this is where I'll just pump a little bit. So, ironically, as I was working on my PhD, who would have thought COVID would be coming? But it's actually what I wrote my dissertation on. So in a timely manner, it ended up being all about online school and all that. So if you ever want to read it, I mean, it's only 290 something pages. I mean, please feel free, but it's all about teaching online and students with disabilities. I had to throw that in there. Okay, students with disabilities are entitled to a free, and somebody say it. 3 words. Oh, Ansley, I see. Oh, unmute yourself and say it, girl.
It was right. I wrote it down. It was the appropriate public education.
There you go. Free and appropriate public education. Now you see that word appropriate. That doesn't mean that we give parents everything and anything they want, and that they get, the government used to call it the Cadillac education or the Chevy education, right? So parents don't get everything they want, and schools don't have to provide everything. It has to be appropriate. So it has to meet the needs of the child. It has to level the playing field for the kids, but it doesn't mean they get everything that they want, which sometimes upsets people. Any questions about IDEA and the law itself? I know we're going through this kind of quick, but y'all, we got a lot of material and only how many weeks? 16 weeks. It's hard to put all this in because I think we can spend a whole course talking about IDEA and the laws and the regulations. So this is just a little bit of an overview.
The notes are going to be posted on the Canvas, right?
Correct. I will post this and stuff on Canvas after class. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I have in chats, I sent you guys the IDEA website, and this has everything in there. It's a lot. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of information, but being in education, it's something just to become familiar with and just knowing this. So I sent you guys a link. I'm not saying you have to go look at it right now and just start diving into it and becoming totally enthralled, but there you go.
Yeah, and this is being recorded too, so I'll post that as well. So we'll have this and the presentation posted after class. So let's talk a little bit about families and parents. So you definitely, when you're collaborating, you want to be sensitive into the backgrounds and their family structures, right? We all have different family units. We all came from different backgrounds. So we want to make sure that we're sensitive to that when dealing with parents and families with our students with disabilities. Just like with any student, this is not specific to students with disabilities, but maintain that positive communication, communicate about homework, resolve those disagreements, and then really help parents cope. So one of the hardest things, and as you do this and maybe you sit in some of these initial eligibility meetings, is sometimes it's very difficult for parents to accept that their children have now been diagnosed with a disability. Now, keep in mind too, schools don't do medical diagnosis. We're looking at an educational disability, right? This is not a medical diagnosis. We're not doctors in schools. We don't prescribe medication. We don't do any of that. We look at educationally, how can we help and where does their child fall? And one of the hardest disabilities, at least in my experience, for parents to really accept is that A1, that autism. That's a very difficult thing for a parent, and oftentimes at meetings you'll have tears and it'll be very sad, and then you got to look positively. Look, we're going to provide supports, and now we can help your child. Now we know what's going on. So really helping them cope is really important. That's where it's important to really collaborate with the families and the parents as well. So we're going to break you out into breakout rooms again. And what you're going to do is you're going to talk about these different scenarios. So try and understand what it'd be like to raise a child with a disability. Imagine yourself in the parent as one of the scenarios below. So in your breakout room, you'll pick one or two, and then you're going to talk about it. And then what was the sense of loss you might experience? How do you think your life would change? What would you want teachers to do to help you and your child? So in your groups, choose who's going to be speaker, and we'll have each group share out and jot down some notes to answer those questions. But think about this. Or Maya's hanging out here with us. There we go. Are these guys in rooms, Mr. Hurley, Hannah, Kendall, and Lindsay?
Lindsay?
I got kicked out of Zoom, and
Oh,
so I just rejoined,
okay.
but it kicked me out of my room.
It kicked you out of the, okay.
Yeah, my breakout room.
Okay.
Sorry, it just like
You're
all shut
okay.
down, and then it brought me back in.
No worries. Don't worry about it. Let's see. It's not even giving me an option to move you to room 4. So I will move you to room 5. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Okay.
And then Hannah and Christian, did you get kicked out and have to jump back in?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Huh. Okay. All right.
What's going on with that internet there in the Clemson area?
There you go, Christian. I sent you, I think, to room 4.
And then Hannah. So she's not joined. I guess we just send her to another room.
Yeah. Fine. Okay.
So we can give them like it's 6:42. We can give them like 10 minutes to talk about this.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. I'll probably jump in a couple of them just to double check
Yep.
and make sure they're clear about what their scenario is, because I think it says on here rooms 1 through 4 is 1, and 5 through 8 are scenario 2.
yeah.
So I'd
That's
hate for them
okay,
to all
yeah.
to do, but
I wonder how I can send this to them. Because if they're in chat rooms, can they still see the presentation?
I don't know.
Okay, so let's join one. I'll go into you go into room 1. I'll go into join room 2 here.
Okay.
You guys doing okay? You're reading it. Do you need to have any questions? You're good.
No questions. Yeah.
All right, just checking in on ya.
Oh, okay.
You guys good?
Yep.
Yes.
Hmm?
I'm just spying. It's kind
Just
of fun.
fine.
It's kind of fun going from room to room.
Yeah.
Okay, bye. Happy talking. They're good.
Yeah, they seemed fine. Breakout 1, room 1 was still working on some of the questions, but they said they were doing well and understood it, and they didn't have any questions for me. So I was like,
I'm just
awesome.
jumping from room to room spying.
Yeah, that's what I did. I went on and it was complete silence, and they're like, "Oh no, he's here. We got to stop talking."
I know. I'm like, are you guys good? I'm just checking on you. I'm just spying on
Yeah,
you. I'm like, okay.
that's right.
Yeah, we're kind of weird like that. All right, I'm gonna go put this coffee cup away here while they do this for a minute.
Oh yeah.
I feel like there's just so much and not enough time to go through it all. Like shoving it all
It's a
into
lot.
It is a lot.
And I think it's going to come across as being just a lot of information. But I think hopefully once the semester gets rolling and once we get more into like the individual disability categories, I think it will flow a bit better. But it's just like that introduction
Yeah.
period of what is special education? Well, what does that look like? And
Right.
the laws surrounding it and where it came from and where it's going. And that's a lot.
It is a
That's
lot.
a lot of information.
Next week, we're talking about what current practices. We do get a little bit more into the IEP, teachers' roles, spend a little bit more time on that. What is it, chapters 2 and chapter 4? And we talk a little bit more about parents and families. And then we really start delving into the different disabilities. I think you're right. As we get into that, I think it's going to become a little bit more clear. The first, and I gotta remember, it's only been the second week. I feel like it's been forever, but this is only the second class.
Yeah.
But it is a lot. I mean, you look at, there's a lot in this syllabus. There's a lot in this course outline that they put into this class.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of sad that it's their only class that they'll have in special ed.
Yeah. Give them, say what, one more minute, 60-minute left, you think?
Yeah, we should be.
I'll go ahead.
I'm gonna give him time to watch and do that and then jump off. Like they don't, I don't want to keep them on till.
Yeah.
Plus it was a lot to absorb tonight.
Yes. All right, I closed them up.
Perfect.
I'll start joining.
Well, welcome back again. You got to see this. It is so funny to have it, like, as people come back to see all these little pictures like pop up. You ever watch the Brady Bunch? It's like a whole big Brady Bunch family with all these little, like, woo, there's a lot of people here. All right, so you should have had some good discussion and then, kind of pick someone from your group. So I think we had 8 groups, Mr. Hurley, right? So let's go with group 1. Who's your spokesperson? Tell us a little bit about Lakin, that's a great question. And we'll get to that after. We will. That's a really good question. So we'll get to that after we talk about these. So just give us a little synopsis in which scenario. I think you guys had scenario 1. What are some of the answers to the questions? So whoever is the speaker for group 1.
I think we were group 1. Yeah, I think but we had just said we answered the questions on the bottom, and we had just said that it's probably a really hard pill to swallow, thinking that, your child can't be independent, because everybody wants the best for their child and everybody wants for their child to be successful. And it's not that they can't be successful, but I think it's probably a hard pill to swallow, knowing that it's harder for them to be successful independently and that they may always require help for certain things. And then we had also said that it's also probably really hard on the parent to think that their child may not be able to reach their dreams because of the disabilities. Like we had said that one of our brothers or sisters in our group had a learning disability and she wants to be a teacher, and the mom was like, maybe that's not in your path because of the disability, but I still want you to try to reach that dream. But that's pretty much all we said.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, it is a hard pill. How about group 3?
We kind of said the same thing. We think that, like, from a parent standpoint, you immediately kind of jump to worst case scenario. But we said that one thing that was important to us was, like, if we were in that scenario, that it's just finding the new family normal, finding the new normal for your family, whether it's, school might, end early for one kid, and, you have to find a balance for them. And then also another big thing for us was communication. So whether that's communication with the teacher, communication with the school, communication with the principal, just being updated and informed about what's going on. And yeah, so those two things really stood out to us in the scenario.
Yeah. Group 2 or 4, do you have anything different or want to add anything to what they said?
We
We
kinda
just
said,
sorry.
Go ahead, Lou.
We talked about how like for the parent, they're gonna need support too and it's good if like the teacher can communicate like some things that are working in class, like practice at home. And also just like how it's gonna be scary for the family. So like while you are focusing on the child and everything, it's hard on the parents as well.
Mhm. Maya, were you gonna say something different? Okay, and if I like don't get your names right, please forgive me. Okay, how about let's go with group 6. You guys did this scenario number 2.
Yeah, the scenarios went away, so we only had a chance to read the first scenario.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so we just talked about that one. Or like, and I'm sure for the cases in all the scenarios, as a parent, it is going to be hard. But we were just talking about like the importance of communication with the teacher and like trusting that they are doing the right testing and that what they say is like true about that child, and just like being receptive of what they're telling you about your child and like being willing to work with them on that. That's what we talked about.
And it is hard to understand as a parent. It's hard for teachers to understand sometimes parent perspectives and parent roles when students are identified. I have a young teacher right now who is struggling with parents and students, and she's picking battles she doesn't necessarily need to pick with the kids. But it's hard for her to see it from sometimes as a teacher. Not only do you also have to be parent and nurturer and caregiver and things like that. So you play so many roles as a teacher that sometimes it's hard. And once you have children, if you ever have children, you start to have I don't want to say this for all teachers, but you somewhat have a little bit of understanding, and you always have to say, well, what if this was my child and I was the parent? How would I react, or what would I do? Does anybody else have anything different they talked about in their group or something enlightening?
We kind of talked about like with the first question, like the sense of loss, like how like parents kind of envision their child's future when they're born, and like of them getting married and getting a job and like having kids, and like when you get a diagnosis like that, like depending on the severity of it, some things just go away.
Yeah.
And like you can't realize, like you can't like hope for that anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, that's
So
a great
kind of-
response.
Yeah, and kind of building off of like what everybody else has already said, it kind of turns into this like community-based thing where you really just have to like really lay your head on somebody else's shoulder and just like kind of all be in this little like knowing together and just advocating for one another within this like scenario. But we also talked about how, because in scenario 2, it was talking about after watching a show, and we talked about how a lot of the time social media can lead to this snowball effect of things where it's like, well, if I see this person being a role model for this, then maybe we can start doing these things. And then maybe this also means XYZ. And then it starts just snowballing, just like it would with any like illness or something like that, where a lot of times social media can heighten these things for us.
Absolutely. Like the parents will self-diagnose, will be, oh, my child has that characteristics, right? I mean, you go on when you get sick, you start looking at the internet and you're like, oh my gosh, I have all these symptoms. I have like chicken flu and whatever. Stop self-diagnosing. It's not true, because honestly, once you've seen a student with disabilities, you've only seen one student with disabilities, right? Everyone is different, and depending on the disability, they're all different. There's a spectrum of everything. And just because, for example, you see a student with autism doesn't, you've seen one student with autism, another student can have autism and look completely different, and have different characteristics and different things. So yeah, they do self-diagnose, and social media does not help at all. Does not help at all. No. So we did have a great question before we go on, and there's one more thing you guys will do, and then we'll call it a night here. Let me just get back to that question. Here we go. Here's the chat. And Lakin asks, how would the IDA work in college, or is it just elementary and secondary education? So that is a great question. So keep in mind, what does IDA advocate for? A FAPE, right? A free and appropriate public education. So colleges and universities are not required to implement IDA because they are not free, right? There is a tuition for students to attend college. It is not free. So students in college do not have IEPs. Once they graduate high school, the IEP pretty much ends. Now that's different, and I don't think we'll get too much into this, but 504 plans. So if we ever heard that term 504 plans, colleges do and have to do 504 plans because that's from Americans with Disabilities, right? That's from the ADA law. So that is not specific, and that is for children through adulthood. So 504 plans and accommodations for individuals 504s do have to be implemented in colleges and universities, but not IDA because it's not free. Wouldn't you like it? I mean, maybe some of you are on scholarships and grants, but wouldn't you like it if your education at Clemson was totally free? It'd be great, wouldn't it? So yeah, we don't have IEPs or things like that in private education. So even private schools, right now, they don't have to implement IDA. They're not held to the same law because they're not free. So here's what you're going to do. So this is a little for next week. Hey, y'all, I think everybody did that little vocabulary activity. So you should have seen your points today. I think I put them in. If I did it right, you should have seen everybody got 2 points. So love that you did that. There is, as you can even see from tonight, there is a lot of vocabulary in this course in special education. So if you're going to do that, that would be due the 18th. And then, of course, the reading is chapter 2 and 4 and be ready to discuss. We do realize Mr. Hurley and I were talking a few minutes ago. Yeah, we know there's a lot, especially put into tonight in terms of laws and IDA and things like that. You know, these first couple of weeks will really be just an overview. As we get into it and we talk more disability specific, hopefully it won't seem as I don't want to say show, but so much in one class because, you know, we'll be specifically talking about one disability. So it should slow down here in a few weeks. This week and next week are really going to be a combination of a lot of things. Like I said, I will post this, and then of course we have recorded it, so that will also be posted if you want to go back, if you so choose to. So what you're going to do is in module 2, you do have a CAP, and it is about parents. So what we want you to do is you're going to watch that independently, and then I'm going to leave the Zoom open. And then you're going to come in the chat and just describe one way you'll collaborate with parents. So watch that little CAP and then talk about one way that you'll collaborate with your parents. Once you've done that, you are free to sign off and have a lovely evening. The CAP is only a few minutes long. And then we will stay on for a little bit after class if anybody has questions.